I stand amid the roar of a surf-tormented shore, and I hold within my hand grains of the golden sand. How few, yet how they creep through my fingers to the deep. While I weep, O God, can I not grasp them with a tighter clasp? O God, can I not save one from the pitiless wave? Is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream? As you noted, our film opens on a beach, possibly because of the very poem that I quoted for you, and also because water is a symbol in the film. Plus, the images of these two children that Cobb sees, they're also symbols. He is quickly collected by men with rifles and brought to their boss, revealing he had a kind of top on him. While Cobb eats, the man, Sato, mentions seeing him before, and soon we see a flashback of a much younger Sato, though Cobb looks to be the same age. He's pitching a deal. They explain that during dreams, ideas can be stolen because conscious defenses are lowered, but with training, the subconscious can defend itself, although it requires knowing everything about Sato. But the tremors show us that this is a dream, because Cobb is asleep while outside a mob is tearing through the streets, thus establishing for the audience that the dream worlds are influenced at least partially by events being sensed in the waking world. Nolan uses a transition between the explosion and Cobb's real watch to show how things are happening much slower inside of the dream. The motivation is provided by exposition, but the rules are provided by demonstration. The job is interrupted by another character, Maul.
If I jumped, would I survive?
This seemingly trivial line is actually foreshadowing something far more significant. In fact, it speaks to the entire reason for Cobb's actions. After a brief exchange, Cobb gets to work infiltrating the room where the meeting had been held in order to access the safe, only for Maul to betray him to Salto. Arthur, Cobb's partner in the dream, is brought in, and to quickly establish that killing is pointless, you just wake up, but pain is still pain. Thus, Cobb shoots Arthur in the head once he has been shot in order to wake him up, and begin the breakdown of the dream world while he tries to read from the stolen file, but it's been redacted. The kick is employed, which means pushing Cobb's chair over into a bathtub to wake him up, after slapping him in the face doesn't work. All of this continues to introduce the audience to the rules via example. Sato has already awakened and has a gun, getting physical with them while the mob continues to tear through the streets. They finally have him back under control, where he admits that he allowed this to go forward as an audition. Meanwhile, we discover that the apartment in the rioting city is, in fact, also a dream, that they're all actually on a train, being aided by some kid operating some equipment in a briefcase. In the dream, the mob breaks in and grabs the third member of the group called the Architect, bringing this to an end, although the trio splits before Sato regains consciousness. Cobb spins his top while holding a loaded gun, but puts it down when the top falls over. A call from his kids comes in, the two we'd seen on the beach, and a brief image of Maul's face suggesting that she's their mother. Important info for his background and motivation. The failure to get the info from Sato means the two are going to be pursued by their client for a time, so they're ready to leave via helicopter, only to find Sato and the Architect within. Not to worry, Sato isn't here for payback. He was impressed with Cobb's work and is hoping that he can pull something off called Inception, that is, planting an idea rather than stealing one. Arthur says it's impossible. A planted idea is recognizable as a plant. But when succeeding at that could mean being able to go back home to see his kids, Cobb eventually says he can do it. He tells Arthur in private that he's done it before, so he believes he can do it again. He visits his father-in-law, the professor, in Paris, where we learn that being involved in this business is the consequence of some event that forced Cobb to abandon pure research for performing heists in people's dreams. And considering he can't go back home, it's probable that the mysterious event is related to the reason that he's a wanted man. The professor introduces him to Ariadne to discuss being an architect for him. Ariadne is referred to by the actor who plays her as female, which is how I will refer to the character specifically. After a test to see if she can make a maze that cannot be solved quickly, Cobb uses the erroneous factoid about not being able to use our brains to their fullest potential. But this is only peripheral to the real point that is being made, about how dreams are a combination of both creation and discovery. The person we are that creates what we see is divorced from the part of us that is perceiving it, and yet that perception is going to drive further creation in a loop. What the architect does is take over the initial creation as far as structure goes, which means that the subconscious of the dreamer is operating within those parameters, shaped by the environment that's been created. As discussed in the behind-the-scenes video, Nolan was intrigued by the process of dreams, especially this aspect of them, which is why this is the center of the reasoning of it. After the explosion of the Parisian street brings them out of it, we are given the throwaway explanation of how all of this is possible. There was a military program originally meant to allow soldiers to be trained in life-threatening situations without anyone actually being in danger. It's also established that time runs faster in dreams, so that 5 minutes in the real world is an hour in a dream, making explicit what we could infer from the close-ups of Cobb's watch. Another 5-minute trip allows her to stretch possibilities, folding the city over like a piece of paper with no disruption to events. Like in all dreams, the normally impossible is simply accepted. But Cobb points out the problem such things create is that the more she does things like this, the quicker the subconscious, represented by the people in the dream, will be provoked into reacting. If a dream follows the feedback cycle, intentional disruption of the cycle will be noticed. In this case, it's Cobb's subconscious. He's not trying to do it, but much like the way that you can't stop your immune system from having an allergic reaction to dust or pollen, he cannot stop his subconscious from attacking her. But what's even more important than that is to never recreate places in your dreams. You should treat the real world like a Lego set that can be plucked from and reassembled in different ways, but only into new forms. Otherwise, if there's a real place in a dream, it's difficult to distinguish between whether or not you're in a dream or in reality. That, after all, was the trick that they pulled on Sato. They recreated an actual place in a dream so that when he awoke in it, he assumed that he was in the love nest apartment he had rather than inside of another dream within that. The problem with Cobb goes even further. He knows this bridge because it triggers a memory of him and Maul, who was soon confirmed to be Cobb's wife. Soon the disruptions draw on the subconscious beings called projections, and Maul herself strides up and stabs Ariadne, possibly called up because of the memory. To deal with a potential situation like Sato was in, people in their line of work carry around totems. That's what the metal top was earlier. It's a part of the real world that only you know about. If it doesn't behave properly, then you know that you're in someone else's dream. Much like how the fact that they were in a dream was spoiled for Sato because he fell forward and rubbed his face on the carpet, and he knew it was made of the wrong material. Because the dream lacked the information about a real-world item, it couldn't be properly duplicated within a dream. While Arthur will be working with Ariadne on honing her architect skills, Cobb goes to find their forger, Eames, who isn't skeptical of Inception. He just believes it's very hard to do it right. The idea has to be very simple. Find a way to translate Sato's desire into something that can be seen as a natural desire for the subject to have. In this case, it's that the head of a corporate empire is dying, and Sato wants the heir to break up the company. Eames already has some ideas, but first Cobb is forced to escape a bounty hunter working for the company that had hired him to go into Sato's dream. Now, at 2.5 hours for the film, including a scene like this might seem unnecessary, but it establishes the kind of people that Cobb is forced to deal with, if they're willing to perform corporate espionage with men like him, and to put out dead or alive bounties on those who fail him. He's chased through the city by gun-wielding killers, barely squeezing through a gap between two buildings, and being rescued at the last moment by Sato personally with a waiting car. This is an allegory for the journey that Cobb is on, a wanted man trying to stay one step ahead, with Sato as the best chance that he has to escape it. If we think of dreams as being a kind of story, then an allegory of the protagonist within the story of the film is a form of the dream within a dream that we see used and reused in this film. The training continues by showing impossible architecture, used to create closed loops for the dream. Mazes, essentially, to keep things contained and to keep the subconscious projections occupied. Naturally, the work of M.C. Escher was inspirational in this, but it also showcases Nolan's desire to try to both show and tell both, to make explicit the rules so that the audience can follow along with the complex ideas. During this is when Arthur reveals that Moll wasn't just Cobb's wife, she's his late wife. The mystery around Moll is like an onion, constantly peeling layers back to reveal more about her. Or rather, like a labyrinth, not unlike the maze that was drawn for Cobb, where the center is the answer to the mystery around Moll and Cobb. Meanwhile, Cobb is meeting with the chemist recommended by Eames, Yusuf, with a special job requiring personal involvement as well as the chemicals needed to reach 3 dream levels in, so deep as to require a sedative. As you might note, this is resembling a standard heist film, assembling a crew to carry out the carefully orchestrated plan, but instead of stealing something, they're planting something. Bringing that into this dream tale allows Nolan to make use of the heist tropes that he'd like, but being able to discard the rest and instead go in a different way. For instance, he plays up the game angle in subtle ways, such as the loaded die for Arthur and the modified chess piece for Ariadne, and the way the groups are often spread out in a way like they're pieces on a game board. Yusuf shows the effectiveness of the compound on the dozen people in the basement who share a dream every day.
They come here every day to sleep.
No. They come to be woken up. The dream has become the reality. Who are you to say otherwise?
Did you see Cobb's reaction to that remark, that look of contempt at the choice of words? Note that for later. Then there's his response when Sato doesn't want to get into the specific of why they're doing this.
The seed that we plant in this man's mind will grow into an idea. This idea will define him. It may come to change everything about him.
Nolan is good at dropping in elements like this, hints so subtle that only in retrospect are they hints. Sato reveals that the reason for this is more than financial. The field that they're both competing in is energy, and the domination of his adversary is such that his company will soon fail, and it will give a corporation a level of control that cannot be permitted.
In effect, they become a new superpower.
After all, if Sato can do what we've seen him do, and what he's offering to do for Cobb, to solve all of the problems of the man's life with a single phone call, if he's losing to the competition, how much greater influence can his competition have? How much control of the world will his competitor be allowed to have? This concern allows Sato to have a less greedy motive than straight up weaken the competition so I can make more money. It gives a way of saying that his motives are at least somewhat benevolent. We can cheer for a member of the crew doing it for the money, that's fine. But Sato needs to seem less base than that if he's going to be sympathetic in this film, Because after all, a criminal wanting to get rich is easier to identify with than an already rich man who just wants to get richer. Because he is our viewpoint character, Cobb's motive is the purest of them all. Nothing to do with money. Oh, he was supposed to get money in addition to getting that phone call, except he's offered it to Yusuf in order to make an exception to go into the field with them, to ensure that this works out. He is an innocent man driven from his family because the authorities think that he killed his wife, and all he wants to do is to end that and be able to go home again. They get down to the challenge of this, that they have to turn a business strategy into an emotional decision, so that the reason comes from the subject's core. And it has to be something positive, doing something because it feels good, fulfills some need. Giving his father the finger isn't going to be enough to make him possibly cut off his nose to spite his face. During all the spitballing in preparation for the job, Cobb is using the new drugs, and Ariadne decides to join him. She believes that Maul is becoming more of a problem, out of control and a threat to them, and seeing that he visits Maul in his dreams, well, that's disheartening. Cobb explains that he's trying to go back and fix his memories of things that he regrets. And in the basement is the worst of them all. A smashed-up hotel room, yet Maul sits in it just fine, as if nothing was wrong. But she freaks out when Cobb arrives to take Ariadne out, about promising to grow old together. In light of this, Ariadne insists that she has to go in. Cobb's efforts to contain Maul are insufficient. They can't have the entire team be blind. Someone has to know what's going on in case the worst were to happen. The plan is to have this all take place over a trans-Pacific flight. Sabotage the private jet so that a first-class ticket on a commercial plane is the only option. With 10 hours, that should be plenty of time inside of the dream to go deep enough to try to plant the idea. It'll have to be, since landing in Los Angeles puts Cobb in the reach of the U.S. authorities that are after him, establishing that this is the highest stakes of all. Cobb, and Sato, who insists on going in to see personally that the job is done, must succeed. It divides Cobb's future between a life with his children or life behind bars. It will only be one or the other. With no one in first class but them and the target, Robert Fisher, they can drug him and then set up for the group dream, first in Yusuf's mind. They steal a taxi to lure Fisher into a trap in order to stage a kidnapping. But there's something unexpected. A freight train is traveling up the center of the street. Fisher's subconscious, it turns out, has been trained, much like what Cobb had been pretending to offer to Sato at the start of the film, so that the projections aren't just angry pedestrians, they're dangerous. Men in SUVs with automatic weapons soon surround and open fire on our heroes, seriously wounding Sato, but the crew escape with Fisher. Cobb is irate. Arthur was in charge of the background investigation and didn't turn up this crucial information, for reasons that further raised the stakes even for Cobb. Because they're going to have to go so deep into the subconscious with all of these dreams within dreams here, the required drugs mean that they can't just come out of it if they are killed in the dream. This means that if they die in the dream, they'll fall into limbo, the formless bottom of the subconscious. And there's no telling how long they can be trapped down there if it happens. Only Cobb among this crew has ever been down that deep. Which means that if anyone does arrive there, they'll wind up in the remnants of what Cobb left behind from his time in limbo. This information ensures that when we go to limbo, because obviously we will, we know why it will match up with Cobb, rather than suggesting that there's some universal shared human subconscious to travel to. Nolan is giving us just enough of the fantastical to allow for the scenario to play out without having to add anything more than that. We can go into dreams, but there's no idea of a linked psychic connection between all human beings. Because doing nothing would mean having to spend an entire week worth of dream time trying to survive assault after assault from militarized projections, there's no choice but to go on as planned to speed up their withdrawal. So they confront Fisher about the safe in his father's room, which he has no knowledge of. But it plants the seed in his mind that there is a safe. And in dreams, people put their secrets inside protected places, vaults, safes, etc., as a means of protecting them. But what this actually winds up doing is telling the crew where they need to look. Eames is impersonating Browning, Fisher's godfather, and more of a father than the real McCoy was, faking being beaten by the others and then dropped alongside Fisher to plant the seeds for Stage 2. He says that among the things in the safe is a will that will supersede the current one, which would break up the company, although Browning says he doesn't know why he'd want to do that. But Ariadne is convinced that there's more at work here than just the training that Fisher has had. There's also the problem of Cobb's subconscious. Maul, she is certain, is responsible for that train. Why would she think that? Because it turns out that trains actually are very significant for Maul and Cobb's relationship. Maul had been talking about being a lover and using the metaphor of waiting for a train, to give but one example. You'll see another very big one soon. So Cobb explains what happened, how he and Maul kept going deeper into dream layers until at the bottom where there was nothing and time was essentially infinite. So they spent the years down there building and building until half a century from their perspective had gone by. And while Cobb eventually tired of it, Maul was so in love with what they were doing that she locked away her totem, a symbol that she was rejecting the notion that the dream could be anything other than reality. When they finally awoke, she was consumed by the belief that reality was actually still a dream. They had to wake up, but he said they couldn't because this was the real world. She would not be convinced of that, though, and loved her husband too much to leave him trapped in the dream. So she arranged the only way to get him to commit suicide and wake up, from her perspective anyway. On their anniversary, she rented a hotel for them, but she smashed up the place before he got there and went out on the ledge, telling him to jump too. She sent a letter to their attorney that he was violent, threatening to kill her, that she feared for her life. She also was checked out by 3 psychiatrists to confirm that she was neither suicidal nor disturbed. She arranged everything so that her suicide would look like this could be nothing else but murder, so that Cobb would have no choice but to die with her. Remember the question that she asked him at the beginning?
If I jumped, would I survive?
Now you know where that question comes from. And the train thing, it was the metaphor that she used right before she jumped. But the reason she used it right before she jumped was that he had used that with her when they were down in limbo right before they ended their lives so that they could come out of the dream. And the way that they ended their lives, by the way, was laying their heads on a train track. That's why Cobb had to go on the run. Except we're halfway through the film at this point, so there's more than that going on here. Nolan has given us most of the puzzle, but left the crucial piece still missing, like the cog that slots into the center to allow all of the gears to turn. But back to the job. The projections are closing in, so they drug Fisher in the dream, and then move everyone into the van to begin the next level of the dream. The reason Yusuf is driving is because this is his dream. He's the only one who's going to stay awake. Everyone else is going to fall asleep in this dream to go into the next level dream that Arthur will have. I'll call them level 1, level 2, and then level 3 when we get down to the bottom one. They have to improvise, so they're going to pull what they call Mr. Charles. Rather than waiting for the security that will be even more intense at this level to track them down, they're going to try to confuse it. Cobb approaches Fisher directly in a hotel bar, where Fisher thinks that he's picking up an attractive blonde. But it's Eames in disguise, stealing his wallet, while Cobb pretends to be his subconscious, training against dream infiltration. After earning his trust, Cobb tries to get him to remember the dream level above, the one where Fisher and the fake Browning were kidnapped, which causes Fisher to actually conjure up his own Browning projection that views the possibility of the will through Fisher's own strained relationship with his father. He sees it as breaking up the company being nothing but a taunt, that without what his father built, that Robert would be nothing, that he could never build anything on his own. Nolan uses this to then further put the audience on the side of the good guys. They may be denying Fisher the corporate empire that his father built, but in so doing, they are allowing Fisher to both reconcile with the father who, in the real world, called him a disappointment with his last words, and also to motivate Fisher to be his own man. Likewise, by making the elder Fisher such an awful man, tearing down his legacy is seen as a fitting end for the audience. At Cobb's suggestion, they're going to be going into what is supposed to be Browning's subconscious, but it's actually going to be Fisher's himself, leaving Arthur to hold off the projections that are hunting for them. Taking this beyond a heist film, Nolan has the van that they are riding with in the first level dream to roll sideways down a hill, causing Arthur to have to start fighting in a spinning hotel hallway. This puts the genre into a situation that would normally be impossible for a heist film, one where it looks and feels like reality but doesn't behave like reality. There are many different problems that a crew can run into, but the failure of basic laws of physics is normally not one of them. In the third layer of the dream, the location is an Alpine stronghold, shifting this into more of a spy movie level of risk, since the opposition is using military-grade weaponry now. Remember that the deeper you go in, the stronger that the security of the subconscious becomes. The problem is that in Dream Level 1, Yusuf is stuck on a bridge with armed bad guys and no place to go but over the side. Now that had been originally planned, but not quite this soon. This means that Arthur has 3 minutes on his level, and they have an hour at theirs. So they'll need to forgo the maze and try to get Fisher to the vault faster. There's some flexibility, as Arthur shows by escaping down a flight of stairs from his assailant, only to then use impossible geometry to do what he needs. But the problems with the van translates down to the others, causing weightlessness in Arthur's level and an avalanche in the one that the team is on. Sato is leading Fisher through the shortcut to the vault, but his wounds in level 1 are starting to affect him even down here. And what's worse, Maul arrives to assassinate Fisher. Cobb has her in his sights, but he can't bring himself to shoot her. As we'll see, Cobb blames himself for her death. Literally pulling the trigger is beyond him until she shoots Fisher first. They arrive to find Fisher dead, meaning that he's down in limbo now. But Ariadne thinks that they can finish this, go down after him to kick him back up to this level so that he can enter the vault. So they arrive on the surf, where she and Cobb see the crumbling remnants of the world that he and Maul had built, where Maul has taken Fisher to draw him down there with her. The water is eroding the world away, both in this way, but also as they see it flowing through the streets. The city seems to be quite literally built upon water. The children are also seen as well, several times, but always with their back to us. Even here, Cobb is still not allowed to see their faces. Up on level 2, Arthur is preparing for the kick for those inside of level 3, which is supposed to be induced by gravity. But since they're in free fall, there is no gravity. So instead, Arthur has them all placed inside of an elevator and is using the explosives that were supposed to bring down the ceiling for the kick to push the elevator car. This is likely an allusion to a famous thought experiment by Einstein about the equivalence principle, where if you were inside of an elevator, there would be no distinguishing between the force of gravity pulling you down or the force of inertia pulling you down as the car accelerated upward. Arthur is therefore using a moving elevator to simulate the force of gravity. As we reach the 2-hour mark of the film and the final confrontation with Maul, it's time for Cobb to finally reveal the reason that he knows how Inception works and why he carries around guilt about her death. When they were down here, she wasn't willing to leave, so he planted the idea in her head that this world wasn't real. And it wasn't. But the problem with Inception was the idea was so down deep that it sprouted into a never-ending certainty that no level was real, even reality itself. His attempt to save wound up driving her to madness and suicide. It's how he knows that Inception works, and why he finds the remark, "This is real, who are you to say otherwise?" from that old man so infuriating. It's why he told Sato that Inception will change Fisher on a fundamental level. He knows it can be done because he did it by accident, and that guilt is why she keeps appearing in his dreams, sabotaging him. It's another paradox. Cobb is innocent of the crime he's been accused of, yet down to the very core of his soul he feels he's guilty. Maul tries to get Cobb to stay with her, but he rejects the temptation, knowing that in the end this is just his own imagined version of his wife that will never have the vitality and complexity of the real thing. Ariadne kicks Fisher back up to level 3, where Eames quickly directs him to the vault, containing a hospital room with his dying father, still saying disappointed over and over. But then he corrects Fisher's assumption that it was because he failed to be like his father, when the disappointment was that he tried to be. The father then gestures to the safe with the will in it, but also there's been a picture that has repeatedly appeared of Fisher as a child with his father, and he is blowing on a homemade pinwheel. Clearly a memory that meant something to the young man. Inside the safe, with the will, is the pinwheel, implying that this is the father that Fisher always wished his dad was. The disappointment was a two-way street here. The elder may have been disappointed that his son, the caretaker of his legacy, wasn't equipped to manage it, and the son disappointed that the father wasn't equipped to be a father. As I said, the audience can thus support this manipulation, because the fictional father given in this dream is able to give something, the simplest thing in the world to give, that the real man could not: the unconditional love of a parent. The kicks are occurring in all 3 levels now, but Cobb is staying to try to find Sato down here to help him find his way back. While he does that, Fisher awakens in the van and brings Browning to shore, where he says that he sees the alternate will was his father's way of saying he should be his own man, and that's what he plans to be. So the job is a success, except that Sato is trapped in limbo, which brings us back to where the film began. Time in limbo can stretch into unfathomable lengths, hence the reason Sato is an old man down here, waiting for Cobb, but he's able to persuade him, to remind him, to come back to reality, with the endlessly spitting top, the same thing which had been used to convince Maul originally, but this time not done with Inception. Upon awakening, Sato places his call, and once off the plane,
Welcome home, Mr. Cobb.
going home, which is often worth more than any amount of money. His father-in-law is waiting to bring him there, where the kids await, and finally Cobb is allowed to see their faces. However, at this moment we see that the top is still spinning when the film cuts to black. The possible implication being that it could still all be just a dream. The ambiguity here is intentional, although Nolan believes strongly that the director should always know the answer to something. Merely saying, "who knows," is just lazy. Since coming out, a definitive answer has been revealed, assuming that Nolan at no point lied to Michael Caine. But rather than analyzing the evidence for or against an interpretation, let's put it to one side for a moment and instead ask, what is Cobb's journey? Consider back to the model of Inception chosen for Fisher, because as he says, we all yearn for reconciliation, catharsis. Maul is a symptom of the fact that Cobb has found neither of those things. In his mind, Cobb wants to reach acceptance for what happened to his wife. In the outside world, he wants to be cleared of all the charges of murdering her. Seeing his kids symbolizes that. But that itself isn't the narrative goal. That's a personal goal for Cobb. The true goal, though, is to wash away the stains of his actions, the emotional one and the legal one. Water again as a theme. Whether or not this is a dream in the end is detail. It is us witnessing, one or the other. The legal permission to go home, which Sato's call will grant him, or the personal one, that in his mind he can go home again. In the waking world, Cobb is trying to find a way to change his past and make him legally innocent again. In his dreams, Cobb is trying to find a way to change his memories of the past in order to gain absolution. The top says that whatever our reality is, Cobb has finally been allowed to move beyond Maul's death. He no longer needs to undo the past. He can move on to a new future. Cobb spins the top, but unlike back in the hotel room near the beginning of the film, remember, when he held a gun prepared to shoot himself if he didn't like the answer, he does not wait for the top to fall before he takes action, because either result means that he can do what he wants and look upon the faces of his children once again, that he's finally earned the right to do so. As for whether or not it's a dream, though, so as not to seem a cop-out, I will offer my interpretation. I know people have pointed out things such as the kids' outfits, but for me it's a matter of the rules. The film repeatedly establishes that those who do this kind of work as often as Cobb does become incapable of dreaming without a machine to induce it. So if Cobb were dreaming, it was while hooked up to the device, and since the device would need to be put away before Fisher awoke, or else it'd give away what happened, well, I don't believe that it would still be a dream then. Besides using a totem, the way to test that you're in a dream is to ask yourself, how did I get here? Cobb experiences all the logical steps from where he went to sleep to how he got here. Now, it's not impossible to say that Cobb is in a dream. There is enough wiggle room in there. I mean, after all, it wouldn't be an ambiguous ending otherwise. But it seems to require much more stretching, in my view, than to take the events at face value. After all, we're either seeing reality, we're seeing a preview of what reality will be inside of Cobb's dream, or this is a fiction while Cobb's mind turns to paste while he's in limbo. 2 out of 3 are not bad odds, and the third really doesn't fit in with the film's theme that Cobb would reject reality to live in a fantasy instead, especially when reality is going to be everything that his fantasy is and probably more. As he established, the Maul in his head is not as real as the real one. Likewise, the children in his dream are not going to be more real than his actual children in the waking world. Again, though, I'm only offering a personal interpretation. I'm not claiming that it's a definitive one. The fact that Nolan leaves it open for people to interpret their own way is an element that I am not trying to intrude upon. Inception is a great film that combines strong character work with clever ideas, exciting action, and careful plotting. It's a work that is both epic yet personal, complicated in its plots yet simple in its motives, explosive and exciting yet subtle and sublime. A work about paradoxes, embracing paradoxes.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!